The floor was shaking before I even opened my eyes. Alarms screamed through the corridor, red light pulsing against the metal walls, and somewhere above me the hull groaned like it was ready to tear apart. I pushed myself up from the ground, my ears ringing, and saw smoke curling from a broken panel near the exit. We had been boarded. There was no other explanation. The station had been quiet an hour ago, and now heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, footsteps that did not belong to any human. I grabbed the edge of a console to steady myself and looked toward the sound. 3 tall figures moved through the haze, their bodies covered in dark armor that shimmered faintly, like oil on water. Their heads were narrow, their eyes glowing a pale blue, and they moved with a strange, gliding confidence, as if walking through a place they already owned. Behind them walked someone shorter, but somehow more commanding. She stopped in the doorway, and every one of her soldiers seemed to straighten at once. I did not know her name yet. I only knew that when she looked at me, something cold settled in my chest. Around me, the rest of my crew had been herded into the room, hands raised, faces pale under the flashing lights. Owen Marsh stood near the wall, blood on his sleeve, his jaw tight with anger he was clearly trying to hold back. Priya Nolan knelt beside him, pressing a strip of cloth against a cut on her arm, refusing to let it slow her down. Behind them, a younger technician named Callum Reyes stared at the alien commander like he had forgotten how to breathe. She stepped into the room slowly, boots clicking against the metal floor, and studied each of us like specimens on display. Her armor caught the light in sharp angles, and a long weapon rested against her hip, though she did not reach for it. She did not need to. Her presence alone was enough to make the air feel heavier. "You are the survivors," she said. Her voice was smooth, almost amused, carrying a faint echo like it passed through some kind of translator. I expected more resistance from a species that claims to be so brave. Nobody answered. I felt my heartbeat pounding in my throat, but I kept my eyes on her, refusing to look away first. She walked closer, stopping only a few steps from me. Her eyes, pale and sharp, moved from my face down to my hands and back up again, as if she were reading something written on my skin. "You," she said, tilting her head slightly, "you are not shaking like the others." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. My silence seemed to interest her more than any answer could have. Behind her, one of the soldiers stepped forward and spoke in a clipped, guttural language. She raised a hand without looking back, and he fell silent immediately. Whatever chain of command existed among them, she was clearly at the top of it, and everyone in that room, human and alien alike, understood it without needing to be told. "My name is Vesa Wren," she said, turning back to address all of us now, though her eyes lingered longest on me. "Some of your kind have heard that name before. Not many live long enough to repeat it." Owen shifted beside me, and I saw Priya place a hand on his arm, a silent warning not to move. The soldiers behind Vesa Wren had weapons raised, though not aimed directly at us yet. It felt like a held breath, like the moment right before a wave crashes onto the shore. "Your station," Vesa Wren continued, "sits on a resource corridor my people have claimed for 3 cycles now. You built here anyway. You knew the risk, and yet you stayed." She let the words hang in the air. That is either foolish or it is brave. I have not yet decided which. I finally spoke, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. "We didn't know this was your territory. There were no markers, no warnings." She studied me for a long moment, and something flickered behind her pale eyes, something between curiosity and disbelief. "You speak to me directly," she said. "Your companions look at the floor. You look at my face. Would it help if I looked at the floor instead?" A few of her soldiers shifted, and I realized too late that my words might have been a mistake. But Vesa Wren did not react with anger. Instead, the corner of her mouth curved into something that almost looked like interest. "No," she said, "it would not help, but it is unusual." She stepped back and gestured toward the far end of the room, where a section of wall had been blown open by whatever weapon had ripped through the station earlier. Beyond it, I could see the dark curve of open space, stars scattered like scattered dust, and the edge of her warship hanging just outside, waiting. "We do not take prisoners without purpose," she said. "There is a decision to be made here, human. Your commanding officer, or whoever speaks for this group, will come with me. The rest will remain, guarded, until I decide what use you are." I looked around the room. Our actual commanding officer, Captain Iris Hale, had been in the far wing of the station when the attack started, and none of us knew if she was even still alive. That left a gap, an empty space where a leader should have been standing, and I watched the fear ripple through my crew as they realized someone had to fill it. "I'll go," I said. The room went quiet in a different way now, a stunned quiet. Owen turned to look at me like I had lost my mind. Priya's hand tightened on the cloth at her arm. Even Callum, still staring wide-eyed at the alien commander, turned his head toward me in disbelief. Vesa Wren tilted her head again, studying me with new interest. "You are not their leader," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I admitted, "but nobody else is stepping forward, and somebody has to." For a moment, nobody moved. The alarms had gone quiet somewhere in the background, replaced by the low hum of the warship's engines outside the broken wall. Vesa Wren's soldiers waited for her signal, weapons still raised, patient in a way that felt almost inhuman, though I supposed that was exactly what they were. "You understand," Vesa Wren said slowly, "that whatever choice I make next, it will not be gentle." "I understand you're the one holding the weapons," I said. "That doesn't leave me a lot of options." Something changed in her expression then, something subtle that I couldn't quite name. She turned to one of her soldiers and spoke a few sharp words. The soldier nodded and moved to secure the rest of my crew, forcing them toward the wall, though not roughly. It seemed almost procedural, like this was a routine they had performed many times before, on many other stations, with many other frightened crews. "Come with me," Vesa Wren said to me, and turned without waiting to see if I would follow. I glanced back once at Owen and Priya. Owen's eyes were wide with something between fear and warning, silently begging me not to do whatever reckless thing he assumed I was about to do. Priya just nodded once, a small gesture that felt like the only kind of goodbye we had time for. I followed Vesa Wren through the broken wall, out past the twisted metal and sparking wires, into a narrow connective tunnel that linked our station to her ship. The air grew colder as we walked, and the artificial gravity shifted slightly beneath my feet, adjusting to match the ship's systems instead of ours. Her soldiers walked behind us, silent, weapons lowered now but still close enough to remind me I had no real freedom here. "You called yourself a survivor," Vesa Wren said as we walked, not looking back at me. "But you volunteered to walk into danger you do not understand, for people who are not even under your command. Explain this to me." "They're my crew," I said. "That's enough of an explanation." "It is not enough," she said. "Not for my people. Among us, leadership is earned through strength, through victory, through fear. You have shown me none of these things. Only foolishness." "Maybe where you're from, that's foolishness," I said. "Where I'm from, we call it doing the right thing." She stopped walking then, and turned to face me fully for the first time since we had entered the tunnel. Her pale eyes studied my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle, like she was trying to find the trick hidden behind my words, the strategy she assumed had to be there. "There is no trick," I said quietly, guessing at what she was searching for. "I just didn't want anyone else to have to be the one who walked through that wall." For a long moment, she said nothing at all. Then she turned and continued walking, her pace slightly faster than before, as if she needed a moment to process something she did not have words for yet. "You will regret this decision, human," she said finally, her voice quieter now, almost thoughtful rather than threatening. "Whatever comes next, on my ship, under my command, you will wish you had stayed silent in that room." I kept walking behind her, my heart pounding, my hands trembling slightly at my sides where she couldn't see them. But my voice, when I answered, stayed steady. "Maybe," I said. "But I'd rather regret being brave than regret staying quiet." She did not respond to that. She simply led me deeper into the ship, past rows of silent soldiers who turned to watch us pass, their pale eyes following me with the same confused curiosity their commander seemed to be struggling with herself. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber, dimly lit, filled with strange consoles and glowing symbols I couldn't read. At the center of the room stood a raised platform, and beyond it, a massive window looking out into open space, where the wreckage of a dozen other vessels drifted silently in the dark, remnants of battles that had happened long before I arrived. Vesa Ren stepped onto the platform and turned to face me, her soldiers forming a loose circle around the edges of the room. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear this was not a place for casual conversation. This was a place for decisions, for judgments, for consequences. "You wanted to speak for your people," she said, her voice carrying easily across the chamber. "Now you will." I stood there, alone in the center of that vast, cold room, surrounded by creatures who saw my kindness as weakness and my courage as something they didn't yet have a name for. And even though my legs felt unsteady beneath me, even though every instinct screamed at me to run, I planted my feet and looked directly into Vesa Ren's pale, glowing eyes. Whatever came next, I had already made my choice. There was no walking it back now. The chamber stayed silent for a long moment after Vesa Ren spoke, the only sound the low hum of the ship's engines beneath the floor. I stood on that platform, aware of every pair of pale eyes watching me from the shadows around the room, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, to keep my hands from shaking at my sides. "Speak then," Vesa Ren said, folding her arms. "Tell me why your people built on land that was not theirs. Tell me why I should not treat this as an act of war." "We didn't know," I said again, keeping my voice level. "If there had been any marker, any signal, any warning at all, we wouldn't have built there. My people don't want a fight we can't win. And yet you stand here, speaking to me as though you are not afraid of losing one," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Which is it, human? Are you cautious or are you reckless? You cannot be both." I thought about that for a moment before answering. "Maybe we're both," I said. "Maybe being careful and being brave aren't opposites. Maybe you can be scared of something and still choose to face it anyway." Something in her expression shifted again, that same flicker of confusion I had seen back in the tunnel. She stepped down from the platform and circled me slowly, the way someone might study an unfamiliar creature, trying to decide if it was worth the effort of a closer look. "Among my people," she said, "fear and bravery cannot exist in the same body. When we feel fear, our bodies compel us to act, to strike first, to remove the threat before it can harm us. There is no room for hesitation. Hesitation means the end." "That sounds exhausting," I said before I could stop myself. One of the soldiers near the wall made a strange, sharp sound that might have been a laugh, quickly silenced by a glance from Vesa Ren. She turned back to me, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something almost like amusement in her expression before it vanished again behind that cold, commanding mask. "You mock the strength of my people," she said. "No," I said quickly. "I just meant that always having to act, never being able to stop and think, that sounds like a hard way to live. We get scared too. We just don't always let it decide what we do next." She studied me for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the massive window at the far end of the chamber, looking out at the drifting wreckage beyond the glass. I stayed where I was, unsure if I was allowed to move, unsure if this silence was a trap or simply her thinking. "There is a ritual among my people," she said finally, not turning around. "When we capture a vessel and its crew, and there is doubt about their intentions, we do not simply destroy them. That would be wasteful. Instead, we test them. One is chosen to face a trial. If they succeed, the rest of the crew is spared and released. If they fail, all of them become the property of my fleet." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face as calm as I could manage. "What kind of trial?" She turned to face me now, her pale eyes catching the dim light of the chamber. "The trial changes depending on the offense. For trespassing on claimed territory, the trial is usually simple, a test of endurance, or a test of skill against one of my soldiers. Most of your kind who have faced it did not walk away easily. And if I refuse? I asked. Then your entire crew becomes property of this fleet, without exception, and you personally will be removed from this ship for cowardice in front of them, she said simply, as if she were describing the weather rather than a matter of life and death. That is the choice you created for yourself when you stepped forward to speak for your people. I felt the weight of that settle over me, heavier than anything I had felt since the alarms first went off. Behind Vesa Ren, through the massive window, I could see fragments of other ships drifting silently in the dark, remnants of crews who had faced this same choice before me and had not walked away from it easily. I thought of Owen and Priya and Callum, waiting back in that damaged room, trusting that I knew what I was doing, even though I clearly did not. "What's the trial?" I said, my voice quieter now but still steady. "Tell me exactly what I have to do." Vesa Ren's eyes narrowed slightly, studying my face for any sign of the fear she expected to find there. Whatever she saw, or didn't see, seemed to surprise her again. "You do not ask if there is another way. You do not beg. You simply ask what must be done." "Would begging change your answer?" I asked. "No," she admitted. "It would not." "Then there's no point wasting time on it," I said. "Tell me what I have to do." She turned and gestured toward one of the consoles along the wall, and a soldier stepped forward to activate it. A holographic image flickered to life above the platform, showing the outline of a section of the ship, a long corridor lined with sealed doors, each one marked with a different glowing symbol. "This is the trial chamber," Vesa Ren said. "You will be placed inside, unarmed, and you will face a series of tests designed to measure resolve, not strength. My soldiers have all completed this trial as younglings, before they were permitted to serve. It is not designed to end a life outright, though many who lack true resolve do not walk out of it unshaken." "What kind of tests?" I asked, studying the holographic corridor. "The first chamber tests whether you can endure discomfort without breaking. The second tests whether you can make a difficult choice under pressure. The third tests whether you will act to protect something, even at cost to yourself." She paused, watching my reaction carefully. "Most of your kind fail at the second chamber. They freeze. They cannot choose." I nodded slowly, trying to keep my expression steady, even as my mind raced through everything that could go wrong. "And if I get through all three, then you will have proven something my people rarely see from outsiders," she said, "and your crew will be released, along with your damaged station, though I cannot promise it will remain untouched by others who claim this territory in the future." "That's fair," I said. "More than fair, honestly." Vesa Ren studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You are strange, human. Your body shows the signs of fear, elevated pulse, tightened muscles, shallow breathing. My sensors detect all of it clearly, and yet you speak as though none of it exists. Why?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, without pretending to be braver than I actually felt. "Because being scared doesn't mean I have to act scared," I said finally. "I can feel it and still choose what I do next. That's the only kind of bravery I've got. It's not about not being afraid, it's about doing the thing anyway." She said nothing to that, but I noticed the way her posture shifted slightly, the way her arms unfolded just a little, as if some tension she had been holding had eased without her meaning it to. She turned and led me toward a sealed door at the far end of the chamber, her soldiers falling into step behind us. "The trial begins now," she said, as the door slid open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage beyond. "I will be watching from the observation deck above. Every moment, every choice, every hesitation. Do not disappoint me, human. I find myself, against my own judgment, curious to see what you will do." I stepped toward the open door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it through whatever sensors she carried. Just before I crossed the threshold, I turned back to look at her one last time. "Vesa Ren," I said, using her name for the first time, testing how it felt in my mouth. "Whatever happens in there, thank you for explaining the rules, instead of just sending me in blind." Something flickered across her face again, quick and difficult to name, gone before I could study it properly. "Do not thank me yet," she said. "Thank me if you walk out the other side." The door closed behind me with a heavy, final sound, sealing me inside the narrow passage alone. The lights along the walls pulsed a dim amber, and somewhere ahead I could hear a low mechanical groan, like something massive shifting into position, waiting for me to take the first step. I thought of Owen's worried face, of Priya's small nod, of Callum's wide, frightened eyes back in that broken room. I thought of Captain Hale, still unaccounted for somewhere in the station, and of everyone else counting on someone to come back for them. Then I took a breath, steadied my legs beneath me, and started walking forward into the dark. The first chamber revealed itself slowly as I moved deeper into the passage, the amber lighting giving way to a colder, blue-white glow that made the metal walls look almost like ice. The air grew noticeably cooler with each step, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. A voice, translated and slightly mechanical, echoed from hidden speakers somewhere above me. "Chamber 1, it said. Endurance." The floor beneath me shifted suddenly, tilting at a steep angle, and I had to grab onto a raised bar along the wall to keep from sliding backward. The temperature continued to drop, and frost began forming along the edges of the walls, spreading like delicate lace across the metal surface. My hands started to ache from the cold, my breath coming in short, visible bursts, but I forced myself to keep moving forward, one careful step at a time, refusing to let the discomfort slow me down completely. Somewhere above, hidden behind reinforced glass I couldn't quite see, I imagined Vesa Wren watching every shiver, every clenched jaw, every moment I paused to catch my breath. I thought about what she had said, about how fear and bravery couldn't exist together for her people, and I wondered if she was starting to understand that for humans, they could. By the time I reached the far end of the first chamber, my fingers were numb and my teeth were chattering, but I was still standing, still moving, still breathing steady, even as the cold tried to convince me to stop. A door slid open ahead of me, revealing a warmer, wider room beyond, and I stumbled through it gratefully, already knowing the hardest parts were still waiting somewhere further inside. The second chamber was nothing like the first. Warm light replaced the icy blue glow, and the air felt almost comfortable after what I had just endured. But comfort, I quickly realized, was not the point of this room. In the center of the space, two pedestals rose from the floor, each holding a small, glowing sphere. Behind them, a screen flickered to life, showing two live images. On the left, Owen's face appeared, seated in a small holding room, unaware he was being watched. On the right, an unfamiliar young alien soldier appeared, seated in a similar room, equally unaware. "Chamber 2, the mechanical voice announced. "Choice." Vesa Wren's voice followed, carried through hidden speakers, cool and measured. "You must choose one sphere. Selecting the left sphere grants your crewmate immediate release from this vessel, returned safely to your station. Selecting the right sphere grants the same release to the soldier you see, a young recruit facing punishment for a mistake made during your capture. Only one may be freed. This is the choice." My chest tightened as I stared at the two screens, at Owen's tired, unaware face, and at the young alien soldier who looked barely old enough to be wearing that armor. I thought about what Vesa Wren had said, about how most humans froze here, unable to choose, and I understood immediately why. There was no easy answer. Both lives mattered. Both were real people waiting somewhere on this ship, unaware their fate rested on a decision I hadn't asked to make. I stood there for a long moment, my hand hovering between the two spheres, my mind racing through every possible angle. Then something occurred to me, something Vesa Wren herself had said back in the observation chamber. The test was not really about which sphere I chose. It was about whether I could choose at all, whether I would act instead of freezing in place. I reached forward and placed my hand on the left sphere, choosing Owen, my crewmate, the person I actually had a responsibility toward. It felt like a small betrayal of the young soldier on the other screen, but I reminded myself that Vesa Wren had created this choice, not me, and the responsibility for it belonged to her rules, not my hand. The sphere glowed brighter under my palm, and the screen showing Owen flickered before displaying a single word in a language I couldn't read, though the tone of the mechanical voice that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Choice registered," it said. "Chamber 2, complete." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my legs suddenly feeling unsteady beneath me. A door on the far side of the room slid open, revealing another passage beyond, darker than the last, and I forced myself to keep moving forward, even though every part of me wanted to sit down and rest for just a moment. As I stepped through the doorway, I caught a brief glimpse of my own reflection in a polished section of the wall, and I barely recognized the person looking back at me. My face was pale, my eyes tired, but there was something steady in my expression that hadn't been there before I boarded this ship. Whatever this trial was doing to me, it was changing something, even if I couldn't yet name what. The third chamber waited ahead, and somewhere above, I knew Vesa Wren was still watching, still studying, still trying to understand why a creature her people considered fragile kept refusing to break. The third chamber opened slowly, and the first thing I noticed was the sound of alarms, different from the ones I had heard back on the station, sharper and more urgent, echoing from somewhere deep within the room ahead. Smoke curled along the ceiling, and red emergency lights pulsed against the walls, casting long shadows that stretched and shrank with every flicker. "Chamber 3, the mechanical voice announced. "Sacrifice." I stepped forward cautiously, my eyes scanning the space for whatever danger the word implied. The room was long and narrow, lined with pipes that hissed faintly, releasing thin streams of vapor into the air. At the far end, behind a wall of reinforced glass, I could see a figure slumped against the floor, unmoving. My heart lurched when I recognized the shape of the uniform, the familiar cut of the jacket. It was Priya. "Your crewmate has been placed in a containment section, rigged to lose atmosphere in exactly 2 minutes, Vesa Wren's voice said, calm and distant through the hidden speakers. There is a manual release mechanism at the far end of this chamber. Reaching it requires crossing a section of floor that is not stable. It was not designed for a body of your mass. The floor may hold, it may not. I felt my pulse spike, adrenaline flooding through me so fast it made my hands shake, despite the steadiness I tried to force into them. Through the glass, Priya still hadn't moved, and I couldn't tell if she was unconscious or simply unaware of what was happening around her. "You do not have to attempt this," Vesa Wren continued. "You have already proven resolve in the first 2 chambers. Refusal here carries no further punishment for your crew, only for your own standing among my soldiers." "But she'll lose air if I don't reach that release," I said, mostly to myself, already moving toward the unstable section of floor ahead of me. "Yes," Vesa Wren confirmed simply. I didn't waste any more time asking questions. I stepped onto the first section of unstable flooring, feeling it shift and groan beneath my weight, small cracks spreading outward from where my boot landed. I kept my steps light and quick, distributing my weight as evenly as I could remember from any safety training I had ever received, though none of it had prepared me for something exactly like this. Halfway across, a section of the floor gave way entirely beneath my back foot, and I lunged forward just in time, catching myself on a raised pipe running along the wall, my legs dangling for a terrifying moment over a dark gap that dropped further than I wanted to think about. My arms strained as I pulled myself back onto solid footing, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the hissing pipes around me. I kept moving, faster now, aware of the seconds ticking away somewhere behind that reinforced glass. The floor cracked and shifted with every step, but I refused to slow down, refused to let the fear in my chest translate into hesitation. I thought about what I had told Vesa Wren earlier, about how being scared didn't mean I had to act scared, and I held on to that thought like a lifeline as I pushed through the final stretch of unstable floor. I reached the far wall just as another section collapsed behind me, and I found the manual release mechanism exactly where Vesa Wren had described, a heavy lever embedded in the wall beside the glass. I grabbed it with both hands and pulled with everything I had left, my muscles screaming from the strain, until it finally gave way with a loud mechanical clunk. The glass wall slid open immediately, and fresh air rushed into the section where Priya lay, her chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths that told me she had simply been unconscious, not in immediate danger the way the countdown had implied. I stumbled toward her, checking her pulse with trembling fingers, relief flooding through me so intensely that I nearly collapsed beside her. She was never actually in danger of losing consciousness from lack of air, Vessaren's voice said, and I looked up to see her standing in a doorway that had opened at the far end of the chamber, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The countdown was accurate. The risk to the floor was accurate, but she was sedated, not suffocating. I needed to see if you would act regardless of whether the danger to her was immediate, or if you would calculate the odds and decide the risk to yourself outweighed the uncertainty of her situation. I stared at her, still catching my breath, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline coursing through my system. You made me think she might die, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Yes, Vessaren said simply, because that is what real choices require. Uncertainty. If you had known for certain she was safe, your action would have meant nothing. It is easy to be brave when there is no true risk. I looked down at Priya, still unconscious but breathing steadily beside me, and then back up at Vessaren, anger and exhaustion mixing together in my chest. And if the floor had given way completely, if I hadn't made it across, then I would have learned something different about your species, she said, her voice quieter now. But you did make it across, and that tells me something I did not expect to learn today. Two of her soldiers entered the chamber and carefully lifted Priya onto a stretcher, carrying her out through the doorway Vessaren had opened. I watched them go, still trying to steady my breathing, still trying to process everything that had just happened. My arms ached, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I registered that I had just crossed an unstable floor, pulled a heavy lever, and possibly saved my friend's life, all without a single weapon in my hands. The trial is complete, Vessaren said, stepping further into the chamber now, studying me with an intensity that felt different from before, less clinical, more personal. You endured the cold without breaking. You made an impossible choice without freezing, and you acted to protect someone even when the outcome was uncertain, even when the risk to yourself was real. Does that mean my crew goes free? I asked, still trying to catch my breath. It means you have proven something my people rarely witness, she said, avoiding a direct answer for a moment, her pale eyes studying my face, like she was searching for something hidden beneath the exhaustion and adrenaline still written across my features. You are not what I expected when I first saw you standing in that broken room, refusing to look at the floor. I straightened up slowly, ignoring the ache in my legs, and met her gaze directly, the same way I had back when we first met. I told you, I said. Being scared doesn't mean giving up. It just means the choice matters more. Something shifted in Vessaren's expression then, subtle but unmistakable, like a wall she had been holding up was starting to crack just slightly at the edges. She didn't say anything for a long moment, simply studying me, in a silence that felt heavier than any of the trials I had just endured. Come, she said finally, turning toward the doorway. There is something you need to see. I followed her out of the chamber, my legs unsteady, but my resolve stronger than it had been when I first stepped through that first icy door. Whatever waited next, I had already proven I could face it, and for the first time since the alarms first went off back on the station, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we were going to walk away from this after all. Vessaren led me back through the winding corridors of the ship, past soldiers who no longer simply glanced at me with cold curiosity, but who now watched with something closer to open attention, their pale eyes following my every step as word of the trial seemed to spread ahead of us. I kept my head level, trying to ignore the exhaustion pulling at every muscle in my body, focusing instead on staying upright and matching Vessaren's steady pace. We arrived at a wide chamber I hadn't seen before, filled with rows of consoles and a massive curved window overlooking the damaged station where my crew still waited. Through the glass, I could see the twisted metal where the alarms had first gone off, the scorch marks along the outer hull, and small figures moving near the breach, likely her soldiers still guarding the room where Owen, Priya, and Callum remained. "There has been a development," Vesa Wren said, stopping in front of the window, her hands clasped behind her back. "While you were completing the trial, my scanners detected a signal originating from deeper within your station, a section we had not yet searched." My chest tightened immediately. "Captain Hale," I said. "She was still inside when the attack started. We didn't know if she survived." "The signal suggests a living presence, trapped behind a collapsed section of the structure," Vesa Wren confirmed. "My soldiers reported the area as unstable and recommended against attempting a rescue. The structural damage in that section is severe, and the air within is venting slowly into space." "How long until it's gone completely?" I asked, already feeling my legs tense, ready to move despite how tired they were. "Approximately 20 minutes by my estimation," she said. "Perhaps less, given the unpredictable nature of the damage." I turned toward the door we had just come through, my mind already racing through the layout of the station, trying to remember which section Captain Hale had been in when everything went wrong. "I need to go back there," I said. "Now." Vesa Wren studied me for a long moment, and I braced myself for another test, another trial disguised as an opportunity, another impossible choice wrapped in careful words. But instead, she simply nodded once, sharply, and turned toward the soldiers standing near the entrance to the chamber. "Prepare a transport," she said in her own language first, then repeated the instruction in the translated tongue for my benefit. We returned to the station immediately. "We?" I repeated, surprised. "You're coming with me?" "The trial is complete," she said, meeting my eyes directly. "What happens next is no longer a test. It is simply a choice, and I find myself curious to see what you will do when there is no ritual demanding it of you, no rule forcing your hand." I didn't have time to process the strangeness of that statement before we were moving again, following a group of soldiers through the ship toward a smaller vessel docked along its side. The transport ride back to the station felt impossibly short and impossibly long at the same time, my mind cycling through worst-case scenarios while my body ached from everything it had already endured. When we arrived, the damage to the station looked even worse from this angle. Jagged metal twisted outward like something had torn through it from the inside rather than the outside. Vesa Wren moved quickly despite her earlier calm, leading a small group of soldiers through the breach, scanning devices in their hands, casting thin beams of light across the rubble. "This way," one of the soldiers called out, and we followed the sound of his voice deeper into the collapsed section, climbing over broken support beams and shattered panels that had once been walls. We found Captain Hale pinned beneath a fallen support strut, her leg trapped at an angle that made my stomach turn, but her eyes were open, alert, tracking our approach with clear recognition despite the pain etched across her face. "Took you long enough," she said, her voice rough but steady, and despite everything, I felt a laugh escape me, sharp with relief. "We need to move quickly," Vesa Wren said, kneeling beside the strut and examining it with practiced efficiency. "The air is venting faster than my earlier estimate suggested. We have perhaps 10 minutes before this section becomes unsurvivable without additional equipment." I moved to the other side of the strut, positioning myself to help lift while two of the soldiers worked at the base of the debris, trying to find a way to shift the weight without causing further collapse. Captain Hale gritted her teeth, clearly in pain but refusing to make a sound beyond that, watching us work with the same steady focus I remembered from every crisis I had ever seen her handle. "On my count," Vesa Wren said, positioning herself beside me. 3, 2, 1. We lifted together, the strut groaning as it shifted, and one of the soldiers pulled Captain Hale free, just as another section of the ceiling above us began to crack and shift dangerously. Vesa Wren's head snapped upward, her eyes narrowing at the sound. "Move now," she said sharply, and we scrambled back toward the breach we had entered through. Captain Hale supported between two of the soldiers, her injured leg dragging awkwardly as we half carried, half guided her toward the exit. The ceiling gave way completely just as we cleared the unstable section, a massive crash echoing behind us as dust and debris filled the space we had just vacated. I turned back instinctively, my heart pounding, but everyone had made it out, Captain Hale included, coughing from the dust, but alive and clear of the collapse. "That was closer than I would have liked," Vesa Wren said, brushing dust from her armor, her voice carrying a note of something that almost sounded like relief. We made our way back through the station toward the room where Owen, Priya, and Callum had been waiting, and the moment we stepped through the doorway, I saw Owen's face shift from tension to disbelief to something like joy as he registered that I had returned and that Captain Hale was with us, injured but alive. "You actually did it," Owen said, moving forward despite the soldier still standing near the door, though the soldier made no move to stop him. "Whatever it is you did, you actually pulled it off." "It's a long story," I said, my voice hoarse with exhaustion, and I meant it in more ways than one. Priya, awake now and sitting up against the wall where the soldiers had placed her after the third chamber, looked at me with an expression that mixed gratitude and disbelief in equal measure. "I don't remember anything after the sedative," she said quietly. "But Callum told me you crossed an unstable floor to reach a release lever. Is that true?" I glanced at Vesa Wren, unsure how much detail to share, and found her watching the exchange with an unreadable expression, standing slightly apart from the rest of the group near the doorway. "It's true," I said simply, deciding that was enough for now. "But that's not the important part. What matters is we're all still here, and Captain Hale is safe." Vesa Wren stepped forward then, addressing the room for the first time since we had arrived. "Your crewmate completed the trial required of your people for the offense of trespassing on claimed territory," she said, her voice carrying the same formal authority I had heard back on her ship. "By the terms of that ritual, your crew and this station are released from any claim my fleet holds against you." A ripple of disbelief passed through my crewmates, and I watched Owen's jaw drop slightly, watched Priya's eyes widen, watched even Callum, still pale and shaken from everything that had happened, manage a small, stunned smile. "That's it," Owen said slowly, looking between me and Vesa Wren. "We're just free to go." "You are," Vesa Wren confirmed, though I would advise establishing clearer boundary markers before attempting further construction in this sector, to avoid similar misunderstandings in the future. "Understood," Captain Hale said, from where she sat propped against the wall, her leg now stabilized by a makeshift splint one of the soldiers had provided. Despite her injury, her voice carried the same authority it always did, and I saw a flicker of respect cross Vesa Wren's expression at the sound of it. As the soldiers began withdrawing from the station, preparing to return to their ship, Vesa Wren lingered near the doorway, watching me with an expression that had shifted somewhere between our first meeting and this moment, from cold assessment to something far more complicated. "I told you that you would regret your decision," she said quietly, stepping closer so the words felt private, meant only for me despite the room full of people around us. I find myself uncertain whether that prediction was accurate. I managed a tired smile, exhaustion pulling at every part of my body but something warmer sitting underneath it, something that felt almost like pride. "I don't regret it," I said, "not for a second." She studied me for a long moment, and something in her pale eyes softened just slightly, an expression I hadn't seen from her before, not once, not even in the quietest moments of the trial. "No," she said finally, "I do not believe you do." The days that followed the attack on the station felt strange in a way I hadn't expected. Repair crews arrived from the nearest human outpost within 40 hours, bringing supplies and replacement panels for the sections that had been torn open during the boarding. Captain Hale's leg was stabilized properly by our medical team, and though she would need weeks of recovery, she insisted on directing repairs from a chair near the command center rather than resting in the medical bay like everyone kept telling her to. I spent most of that first week in a strange, exhausted daze, my body slowly recovering from the trial, while my mind kept replaying moments from Vesa Ren's ship, the icy chamber, the impossible choice between two spheres, the unstable floor that had nearly given way beneath me. Owen brought me food I barely touched, and Priya checked on me more often than necessary, both of them treating me with a kind of careful respect that felt unfamiliar after years of being just another member of the crew. "You could have died in there," Owen said one evening, sitting across from me in the mess hall, his voice quieter than usual. "Any one of those chambers, the cold, the choice, that floor, any of it could have gone wrong." "I know," I said, and I meant it. I had thought about that constantly since returning, lying awake at night replaying every moment where things could have turned out differently. "So why'd you do it?" he asked. The same question Vesa Ren had asked me back on her ship, though it felt different coming from him, less like an interrogation, and more like genuine confusion from someone who cared about the answer. I thought about how to explain it, the same way I had tried to explain it to Vesa Ren in that cold, unfamiliar chamber. "Because somebody had to," I said finally, "and because I couldn't live with myself if I let fear make that decision instead of me." Owen didn't say anything else, just nodded slowly, like he was turning the words over in his mind, trying to understand something that didn't quite fit the shape of his own instincts. I didn't blame him. It hadn't fit my own instincts either, not really. It had just felt like the only thing I could do in that moment, the only choice that wouldn't leave me hollow afterward. 3 weeks after the attack, a message arrived through the station's communication array, flagged as originating from an unfamiliar signal source outside standard human frequencies. Captain Hale called me to the command center immediately, her expression unreadable as she gestured toward the console. "It's addressed to you specifically," she said, "by name." I stepped forward and activated the message, and Vesa Ren's face appeared on the screen, her expression composed but somehow different from how I remembered it, softer around the edges in a way that surprised me. Behind her, I could see the interior of what looked like a different ship, larger and more formally decorated than the vessel that had boarded our station. "Human," she said, and then paused, something almost like a smile touching the corner of her mouth. "I have decided your name deserves to be used instead. Daniel Foss. I trust the repairs to your station are proceeding well." I glanced at Captain Hale, who simply raised an eyebrow and gestured for me to respond, clearly amused by the formality of the message, despite the strangeness of its origin. "They are," I said, unsure if the recording would even capture two-way conversation, or if this was simply a message meant to be received and answered separately. "Thank you for asking." The recording continued, Vesa Ren's expression growing more serious as she spoke. "I have submitted a report to my superiors regarding the incident at your station," she said. "I described the trial, and I described your performance within it, in full detail. This report has caused considerable discussion among my command structure. Many of my people have long believed your species incapable of true resolve, viewing your lack of instinctive aggression as a fundamental weakness. I have suggested, based on what I witnessed, that this assessment may require revision." I sat back slightly, absorbing the weight of what she was saying. Somewhere far beyond this station, in rooms and structures I couldn't picture, decisions were being made about how an entire species viewed humanity, and somehow, my choices in that cold trial chamber had become part of that conversation. "There is more," Vesa Ren continued, her voice carrying a note of something almost hesitant, unfamiliar, coming from someone who had radiated such absolute confidence when we first met. "The soldier you saw during the second chamber, the young recruit facing punishment for the mistake that led to your station's discovery. I want you to know that your choice, selecting your own crewmate over him, did not result in punishment beyond what he had already anticipated. He remains in service, and he has asked that I convey his understanding of your decision. He does not hold it against you." Relief washed through me at those words, a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying easing slightly in my chest. I had thought about that young soldier more than once during the past 3 weeks, wondering what had happened to him, wondering if my choice had cost him something severe. "I am transmitting coordinates along with this message," Vesa Ren said, her tone shifting again, becoming more formal, more official. My fleet has revised the boundary markers for this sector, moving our claimed territory further from your station's location. This should prevent similar misunderstandings in the future. I have also included information regarding safe communication channels, should your people wish to establish more formal contact with my government going forward. The message paused for a long moment, and I found myself leaning forward slightly, waiting to see if there was more. I told you that you would regret your choice, Vesa Ren said finally, and there was something almost warm in the way she said it now, nothing like the cold threat it had carried when we first stood in that broken room together. I was wrong. It seems the regret belongs to me instead, for underestimating what your species is capable of. I do not offer that admission easily, Daniel Foss. Consider it earned. The recording ended, and the command center fell silent for a long moment, everyone present absorbing the strange, unexpected weight of what we had just heard. Captain Hale finally broke the silence, a small, tired smile crossing her face despite the pain still evident in her posture. Well, she said, I don't think any of us expected first contact to go quite like this. Neither did I admitted, still staring at the blank screen where Vesa Ren's face had been just moments before. Over the following months, that first message became the beginning of something larger, a slow, careful exchange between our two peoples that started with cautious diplomatic messages and gradually grew into something resembling genuine communication. I found myself involved in that process more than I ever expected, called upon repeatedly to advise on interactions with Vesa Ren's people, my name apparently carrying a strange kind of weight in conversations happening far above my usual position within the crew. I met Vesa Ren again 8 months later, during a formal diplomatic gathering held on neutral ground between our two territories, a small station built specifically for the purpose of ongoing negotiations. She looked different somehow, though I couldn't immediately place what had changed, until I realized it was simply the absence of that cold, assessing distance that had defined our first encounter. Daniel Foss, she said, greeting me with something that might have been the alien equivalent of a smile, subtle but unmistakable now that I had learned to read her expressions better. You look considerably less exhausted than the last time I saw you. I've had time to recover, I said, unable to keep a small laugh from escaping. Your trial chambers aren't exactly gentle. They are not meant to be, she said, though there was no defensiveness in the words, only quiet acknowledgement. But I find myself grateful for their difficulty now, strange as that may sound. Without them, I might never have learned what I learned that day. We walked together through the neutral station, discussing the ongoing negotiations, the careful steps being taken to build understanding between two species who had started as enemies and were slowly, cautiously becoming something else entirely. I told her about Captain Hale's continued recovery, about Owen's promotion following the incident, about Priya's request to be included in future diplomatic missions after everything she had witnessed. And the young soldier, I asked eventually, the question I had been wanting to ask since receiving her message all those months ago. The one from the second chamber, how is he? He has been promoted twice since that day, Vesa Ren said, a note of genuine pride entering her voice. He speaks of the incident often, though not with resentment as you might expect. He says it taught him something about the nature of difficult choices, about how they do not always have a version where nobody loses something. I nodded slowly, feeling a strange kind of closure settle over that particular worry I had carried for so long. I'm glad, I said simply. We stopped near a wide window overlooking the neutral space between our territories, stars scattered endlessly in every direction, no wreckage drifting here. No signs of the conflict that had once defined every interaction between our peoples. Vesa Ren stood beside me in comfortable silence for a long moment before speaking again. When I first met you, she said, I told you that you would regret your bravery. I believed it completely in that moment. I had seen countless creatures freeze, break, surrender under far less pressure than what I placed upon you. I expected nothing different from a human. And now? I asked. Now I understand that bravery, real bravery, is not the absence of fear, she said, echoing words I had spoken to her so long ago in that cold trial chamber. It is the choice made in spite of it. I did not have language for that concept before I met you. My people do now, because of what you showed me that day. I looked out at the stars stretching endlessly beyond the window, thinking about everything that had happened since that first alarm went off back on the station. The cold chambers, the impossible choice, the unstable floor, and everything that had grown from those few desperate hours. What had started as a threat, a cold warning meant to break me before I even understood the stakes, had become something else entirely, a beginning rather than an ending. You were wrong about one thing, I said, glancing at her with a small smile. Only one thing? She asked, something like dry humor entering her tone now, a lightness that would have seemed impossible during our first encounter. You said I would regret it, I said. I never did, not once, not for a single moment, not even when I thought I might not make it across that floor. Vesa Wren turned to look at me fully then, her pale eyes holding none of the cold assessment they once carried, replaced instead by something that felt genuinely close to respect, perhaps even something warmer than that. No, she said quietly, I do not believe you ever did. And that, Daniel Foss, is the very thing that changed everything. We stood there together for a while longer, watching the quiet stars beyond the glass. Two representatives of species that had once seen each other only as threats, now standing side by side in a silence that felt, for the first time, entirely peaceful. Whatever came next for our peoples, whatever challenges still waited in the space between us, I understood now that the first step had already been taken, not with weapons, not with fear, but with a single choice made in a cold, unfamiliar chamber, when everything could have gone another way, and I had chosen to walk forward anyway.